What would you do if someone crushed your dreams in front of everyone you trusted? Would you fight back? Would you disappear? Or would you wait for justice to find its way? The downtown community center smells like floor wax and old coffee every Tuesday evening. The main hall transforms, folding chairs arranged in neat rows, a small stage lit by fluorescent tubes. This is where Kalen Virel comes to breathe, not to perform. Not yet, just to listen. Open mic poetry night. 23 regulars, same faces, same encouragement, same gentle applause. Keelan sits in the back corner, always the back corner, notebook pressed against his chest, pages filled with words that ache to be heard. He writes about the streets he walks, the faces nobody sees, the silence between heartbeats when the city sleeps and dreams leak through concrete cracks. Tonight feels different. Tonight the room buzzes with whispers. Director Brandis Ironful arrives early, clipboard in hand, expensive shoes clicking against linoleum. He never comes to open mic nights. Behind him walks Theron Shadeward, cultural liaison from the City Arts Council camera crew, trailing like faithful shadows. Regulars shift in their seats, nervous energy crackling. Tonight they're being watched. Evaluated. Judge Brandis takes the microphone, his voice cutting through warm-up chatter. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we scout for our annual city showcase. 3 poets will be selected, full scholarship to the summer intensive program, publication opportunities, professional mentorship. The room holds its breath. Cullen's fingers tighten around his notebook. This is it. The moment he's been preparing for, without knowing he was preparing. Alec Thornvale goes first. Polished verses about suburban longing, safe metaphors wrapped in perfect meter. The judges nod approvingly. Serafina Duskmore follows her poem about losing her grandmother, moves half the audience to tears. Brandis makes notes, underlines something twice. One by one, they take the stage, poets sharing their carefully crafted pieces. The familiar faces Kalen has watched grow braver week after week, then silence. The kind that demands filling. Anyone else? Brandis scans the room. Callan's heart hammers against his ribs. His notebook suddenly weighs nothing and everything. The words inside burn to be released. This is your moment. The voice in his head sounds like his father, dead 3 years now, but still coaching from memory. Stand up, walk forward, trust the words. Callan rises, his legs move without permission from his brain. 23 familiar faces turn toward him, plus the strangers with their cameras and clipboard. She reaches the stage. The microphone feels cold against his palm. Under the lights, the audience becomes shadows. He opens his notebook, finds the page, the poem he wrote last week about hunger, not for food, but for belonging. His voice starts quiet, then grows. I know the weight of empty pockets, the sound of doors closing before you knock. I've counted coins for dignity, measured worth in sidewalk cracks. The words flow like water, finding its level. His notebook, forgotten memory taking over. I am the space between heartbeats, the pause before sirens, the silence that follows questions nobody wants answered. Room has disappeared. Only the words exist now. Only the truth he's carried in his chest, finally set free. When he finishes, the silence stretches. Different from before, deeper. Then applause, real applause, the kind that comes from recognition, not politeness. Kalen looks toward the judge's table. Brandis is writing. Theron whispers something to the camera operator. For 30 seconds, Kalen believes. Then he sees it. The look, the subtle head shake, the pen being set down. What comes next will change everything. Brandis Ironful clears his throat. The sound cuts through lingering applause like scissors through silk. Thank you all for sharing tonight. We have our 3 finalists: Alec Thornvale, Serafina Duskmore, and Lyra Stormwinth. They names echo in the fluorescent lit space, each one landing like a stone in Kellen's chest. Lyra hadn't even performed tonight. She'd read last week a piece about her semester abroad in Florence, safe observations about cobblestones and cappuccinos. Kalen remains frozen at the microphone, the notebook trembling in his hands. 23 faces avoid his eyes. The cameras keep rolling. Actually, Brandis continues, his voice carrying false concern. I'd like to address something. He steps closer to the stage, each footstep deliberate, calculated. Young Man poetry is about craft, about education, about understanding the traditions that came before us. What you just shared, while passionate, lacks the technical sophistication we're looking for. Kalen's throat closes, words trapped behind confusion, but the audience loved it. He felt it, the connection, the recognition. Furthermore, Brandis adjusts his glasses. The subject matter, while authentic to your experience, doesn't represent the image our city wishes to. Project translation echoes in Kellen's mind. You're too poor, too real, too much. The community center regulars shift uncomfortably. Mrs. Shun, who always sits front row, looks down at her hands. Even Elric won't meet his eyes. I encourage you to keep writing. Brandis says with rehearsed kindness, perhaps take some classes, learn proper form, study established poets. The camera operator zooms in, capturing Kellen's humiliation for whatever promotional material they're creating. Kellen steps away from the microphone, his notebook pressed against his ribs like armor that failed as he walks toward the exit, head down, footsteps echoing. Theron Shadeward calls out, "Oh, one more thing." Kalen stops, doesn't turn around. "Will need you to sign a waiver for the footage. You understand the final insult. They want to use his rejection, his public shaming, as content outside the community center." The night air bites. November in the city, where dreams go to freeze. Callan sits on the concrete steps, opens his notebook. The pages flutter in the wind, each poem suddenly feeling childish, amateur, pointless. He's about to close it when something slips out, falls onto the step beside him. A photograph, old, creased from years of handling, black and white. He picks it up, studies it under the streetlight. A young man on a stage, microphone in hand, audience leaning forward, completely captivated. The face looks familiar, something in the jaw, the way he holds his shoulders. Callan flips the photo over. Faded ink and careful handwriting. Riven Hollowglen City Poetry Champion, 1987. When words are your only weapon, make sure they're sharp. Riven Hollowglen. His father's name, his father who died before telling him this part of the story. His father who worked construction, who never mentioned poetry, who never spoke of stages or audiences or dreams that lived in notebooks. Galen stares at the photo. The young man who looks like him, standing where he just stood, holding a microphone like it belonged in his hands. 1987, 37 years ago, back when Brandis Ironful was probably just starting his climb up cultural ladders. The same stage, the same dream, the same dismissal. Kalen slides the photo back between the pages of his notebook. A secret folded into words, a legacy hidden in plain sight. The wind picks up, carries the smell of rain and possibility. Everything just changed again. The story spreads like spilled ink across social media, across coffee shop conversations, across whispered hallways. Someone filmed it, not the official camera crew. A phone hidden, hungry for humiliation. The video appears everywhere. Young poet gets reality check. Wannabe writer gets schooled. Dreams crushed in real-time. Comments pour in like poison rain. He thought he was special. Stick to your day job. This is what happens when you aim too high. Kalen stops reading after the first 100. But the damage spreads beyond his control, beyond his neighborhood, beyond his ability to hide it. The coffee shop where he works mornings. Customers recognize him, point, whisper. Some ask for autographs, mock signatures on napkin. The manager, Talon Greaves, pulls him aside. "Friday afternoon, kid, you're becoming a distraction. Maybe take some time off. Let this blow over. Time off without pay means choosing between rent and food." There is no choice. Galen walks home through streets that know his face, past the community center where a new sign hangs, announcing expanded programming funded by city grants. Brandis Ironful's signature printed bold at the bottom. The harassment follows him onto buses, into grocery stores. Young kids call out lines from his poem, twisted into playground taunts. "I know the weight of empty pockets," they sing, laughing until they fall over. Adults are worse. They pretend not to see him, but their eyes follow their heads, shake their conversations. Pause when he passes. 1 week becomes 2, becomes a month. Keelan retreats deeper into himself, into his notebook, into the photograph of a father who never told Him about stages and dreams and the weight of words. He writes angry poems now. Bitter verses about systems that crush spirit before it learns to fly, about directors who mistake prejudice for artistic standards, about cameras that capture pain for entertainment. But even his anger feels small, contained, like shouting into a vacuum. The community center continues its Tuesday nights without him. The 3 chosen poets appear in local newspapers, smile at cultural events, receive their scholarships. Like rewards for safety. Aelric Thornvale writes about autumn leaves. Serafina Duskmore explores themes of hope. Lyra Starmwind crafts verses about personal growth. Nothing that challenges, nothing that discomforts, nothing that demands change. Meanwhile, Kalen discovers something else every Tuesday evening. When open mic night happens, he walks past the community center, not going in, just passing. And every Tuesday evening he notices Isolde Nightshade, the janitor, always there, always cleaning, always invisible. She mops floors during setup, empties trash during performances, wipes down tables during applause. 50-something gray, hair pulled back, uniform that's seeing better years, hands that never stop moving. Most people look through her like she's furniture with a heartbeat, but Kalen sees something else in how she pauses when poets take the stage. She leans her mop against the wall when words get particularly good. How she stays late after everyone leaves in the empty room where voices still echo. One Tuesday, Kalen's curiosity wins. He circles back, peers through the window. Isolde stands alone on the small stage. No microphone, no audience, just her and words spoken to shadows. Her voice carries, even through glass rich with stories that have never seen spotlight. She recites from memory poems that sound like they were written by someone who understands the weight of being overlooked. When she finishes, she looks directly at the window at Kalen, not surprised, not embarrassed, just acknowledgement. One hidden talent recognizing another. She walks to the window, opens it. You planning to stand out there all winter? Her voice is warm despite the words. Kalen steps closer. I didn't mean to spy, she laughs. Spying implies secrecy. I've been watching you watch me for weeks. They stand in comfortable silence while November wind carries dried leaves between them. You know, she says finally, your father used to do the same thing. Kalen's breath catches. You knew him? Isolde smiles. Kid, I've been cleaning this place for 38 years. I knew everyone who ever touched that stage, including the ones they tried to forget. She glances back at the stage where his father once stood, where he once stood, where dreams go to be measured and found. Wanting some stories, she continues, don't end the way people think they do, especially when those stories involve men like Brandis, Ironful, who've been rewriting history to suit their vision for longer than you've been alive. The wind picks up, carries promises and secrets, and the possibility that Tuesday nights might mean something different than he thought. What aren't you telling me? Kalen asks. Isolde closes the window, but not before saying, your father's story isn't finished. It's just been waiting for someone brave enough to pick up where he left off. The community center goes dark, except for one light in the basement where stories sleep until someone wakes them up. December arrives like an eviction notice, cold in Fennel. Keelan's apartment grows smaller each day as bills pile higher than hope. The photograph of his father lives between pages of his notebook, now a secret pressed like a flower between prayers. He stares at it during the long hours when sleep refuses to come, when hunger makes thinking feel like swimming through thick honey. 1987, the year his father held a microphone like it was salvation. The same year, according to the eviction notice, that Brandis Ironful became cultural director of the community center. Coincidence? Or something darker hidden in the spaces between official records and true stories? Kalen writes questions in the margins of unpaid bills. What happened to you? Dad? Why did you never tell me? What did they do to make you disappear from your own dreams? The words blur, not from tears, but from exhaustion that reaches deeper than sleep can fix. Outside his window, the city moves with purpose. He no longer feels people going to jobs he doesn't have, buying coffee he can't afford, living lives that make sense. His phone buzzes. Text from Talon, the coffee shop manager. Sorry, kid, had to make the position permanent. Budget constraints. You understand. No, he doesn't understand. But understanding won't pay rent or buy groceries or fix the hole where his confidence used to live. Kalen closes his notebook, slides it under his pillow, tries to sleep at 3 in the afternoon because dreams cost nothing. The knock comes at 4:33. Deliberate raps followed by silence, then 3 more. Kalen opens the door, expecting landlord or bill collector or someone else with bad news instead. Isolde Nightshade stands in his hallway holding a thermos and a paper bag that smells like home cooked. "Mercy, may I come in?" Her voice carries the authority of someone who's seen enough broken things to know which ones can still be fixed. Keelan steps aside, watches her take in his studio apartment, the careful arrangement of poverty, everything in its place because there's so little of everything. She sets the thermos on his small table, removes soup still steaming and sandwiches wrapped in carrot. "First," she says, "talk after." Soup tastes like chicken and vegetables and the memory of being cared. Fourth sandwich disappears in minutes, hunger making him forget manners, pride, everything except the simple gift of not being empty when the food is gone. Isolde speaks, "Your father and I were friends. Not romantic," she adds quickly, seeing his expression, "but real friends. The kind who understand each other's silences." She pulls out her own notebook, worn leather held together with rubber bands. "We used to write together Tuesday nights after the official poetry ended when the building was ours, just 2 dreamers. Practicing revolution, 1 verse at a time." Kellen leans forward. "Tell me what happened." Isolde's eyes grow distant, looking through his wall at memories 37 years. Deep. Riven was brilliant, really brilliant, not just talented, revolutionary. His poems didn't just describe poverty. They demanded change, made audiences uncomfortable with their own comfort, made them question systems they benefited from, stories they told themselves about merit and justice and who deserves what. The city poetry championship 1987. Your father was the favorite, everyone knew it, including Brandish. She opens her notebook, shows Kalen newspaper clippings yellowed with HYUNG. Poet takes city by storm, local artist challenges social norms. Riven Hologlan, voice of a Gianni Radio. In every photo, his father looks exactly like the man in the hidden photograph, confident, purposeful, alive with possibility. What happened? Kalen whispers. Isolde closes the notebook. The championship night. Riven performed his most powerful piece about housing inequality, about wage theft, about how the city spends money on statues while children go hungry. The audience gave him a standing ovation. 5 full minutes of applause that shook the building. Then the judges deliberated for 2 hours. When they returned, Brandes announced that due to technical irregularities in the submission process, Riven was disqualified. Technical irregularities. Kalen repeats the words, tasting like poison. Isolde nods. They claimed he'd violated some obscure rule about poem length, or content restrictions, or participant eligibility rules that had never existed until that night, rules that materialized conveniently when someone spoke truth to power and Dad just accepted it. Isolde's smile turned sad. Your father was 22, naive enough to believe the system would correct itself if he just followed the proper channels. He appealed, filed complaints, wrote letters, demanded transparency. Every door closed, every phone call went unreturned, every promise turned to smoke. 6 months later, he stopped writing, started working construction, married your mother, never spoke of poetry again. Isolde reaches across, touches Kellen's hand, but he never threw away his notebooks, never forgot what it felt like to hold a room in the palm of his voice. He never stopped believing that someday someone would finish what he started. The apartment grows quiet except for the radiator's gentle hissing and the sound of a young man learning that some fights span generations. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from. Isolde stands, leaves the empty thermos, but takes her notebook. Think about what I've told you, but more importantly, think about what you're going to do with it. The door closes softly, leaving Kalen alone with his father's photograph and the weight of inherited dreams. Outside, snow begins to fall, covering the city in temporary beauty that will melt by morning unless someone decides to fight for permanent. Change snow melts into January. Resolve Isolde returns 3 days later with purpose written in her stride. She finds Kalen at the kitchen table surrounded by his father's photograph, his own notebook, and questions that multiply like shadows. I've been thinking, she says, settling into the chair across from him, about your father's disqualification, about those technical irregularities, about evidence. Isolde opens her worn leather bag, removes a manila folder thick with papers, official seals, and the weight of buried truth. Eve, been the janitor at that community center for 38 years. Do you know what janitors see? Everything. She spreads documents across his small table like tarot cards, revealing futures hidden in the past. Original registration forms from 1987 complete, with signatures, dates, timestamps, rules, and regulations as they existed before the championship, before convenient amendments appeared overnight. And this, she slides forward a handwritten memo dated 3 days after his father's disqualification, from Brandis Ironful to the City Arts Council, recommending policy changes to prevent future disruptions to community standards. Kalen reads the memo twice, each word confirming what his heart already knew. They planned it, he whispers. Isolde nods. Your father scared them, not because he was angry, but because he was right, and because his poetry made people think about who benefits from keeping things exactly as they are. She pulls out another folder, this one newer, filled with newspaper clippings from recent years. Brandis has been careful since then, only selecting artists who color inside approved lines, safe poets, safe topics, safe challenges to nothing important. But here's what he doesn't know. Isolde reaches into her bag, removes something wrapped in cloth, handles it like sacred artifact. Your father's championship poem, the one he performed that night. He gave me a copy before he stopped writing, asked me to keep it until someone who would understand came looking. She unwraps a typed manuscript, title page reading, When the System Eats Its Young, by Riven Hologlin, 1987, City Poetry Championship. Alan's hands shake as he takes it, his father's words preserved like DNA, waiting for resurrection. As he reads, his breath catches. The poem dissects inequality with surgical precision, names specific policies that create poverty, challenges specific people who profit from suffering. It's brilliant, it's dangerous, it's everything poetry should be when it refuses to stay silent. No wonder they silenced him. Kalen says. Isolde watches him absorb his father's legacy. This is why I waited so long to show you. You needed to understand the cost before you knew the weapon. Words, when used correctly, are the most powerful force in the world. They can topple governments, change minds, shift culture, create revolution. But first they must be spoken by someone brave enough to face the consequences. The apartment falls quiet, except for the sound of pages turning, as Kalen discovers his father's voice. Each verse builds toward truth that still needs telling. Each line demonstrates techniques he's been trying to learn through instinct. It's like finding a masterclass written in his own DNA. But there's something else, Isolde says. She removes one final item from her bag of business card, slightly worn, with a handwritten note on the back. The card reads, Sylvester Stallone, Rocky Productions, Petal Child Fake High. The handwritten note in faded ink. Riven, your words hit harder than any punch I've thrown. Keep fighting. Sly. Kalen stares at the card, then at Isolde. Sylvester Stallone, the actor? She nods. He was in town filming something, summer of 1987. Came to the community center for research about local artists struggling against odds. Your father's preliminary performances before the championship caught his attention. Said he'd never heard someone capture the fighter's spirit with words instead of fists. They talked for hours after that preliminary round. About art, about truth, about refusing to give up when the world wants you to disappear. Stallone gave him the card, told him to call after the championship, said he had ideas for projects that needed authentic voices. But then, the disqualification. Kalen finishes. Your father never called. Too ashamed, too broken, too convinced he'd failed. Isolde carefully rewraps The manuscript, the business card, the evidence of systematic silencing. But here's what your father never knew. She pulls out her phone, opens an internet search. Sylvester Stallone still makes movies, still looks for authentic stories about underdogs who refuse to quit, still believes in the power of art to change minds. The search results show recent interviews where Stallone talks about supporting emerging artists, about finding voices that speak truth. He's in Philadelphia next month, Isolde says quietly, doing publicity for his new project. Sometimes she continues putting away her phone. The universe provides second chances, not for the people who missed them, but for their children who inherit their parents' dreams. Kalen looks at his father's photograph, at the manuscript, at the business card, at 37 years of silence waiting to be broken. At the manuscript, at the business card, at the business card, at 37 years of silence waiting to be broken. The photograph, at the manuscript, at the manuscript. Are you suggesting? Isolde stands, pulls on her coat. Winter hasn't finished with the city yet. Suggesting that some stories don't end when people think they do. I'm suggesting that your father's poem deserves the audience it was denied, and I'm suggesting that talent plus truth plus courage can still defeat systems built on keeping people quiet. She heads toward the door, then pauses. First, you need to decide what you're willing to risk to honor your father's voice, and whether you're ready to face Brandis Ironful with something more powerful than anger. The door closes, leaving Kalen with inheritance he never expected. Outside, snow begins falling again, but this time it looks less like an ending and more like preparation for spring. February brings an announcement that changes everything. Community Center unveils its plan for the annual Spring Arts Showcase, a celebration of local talent funded by New City grants. Brandis Ironful's photograph appears in newspapers, smiling beside the mayor, discussing cultural investment and artistic excellence. 3 featured poets will perform: Elric Thornvale, Serafina Duskmore, Laura Storm-Wintz. Same 3 from November selection, now polished, coached, ready to represent the city's creative vision. Showcase promises television coverage, influential audience members, potential publishing contracts, everything Kalen dreamed of handed to poets who never challenged anyone's comfort. Isolde finds him reading the announcement in the coffee shop where he used to work. Perfect timing, she says, sliding into the booth across from him. Perfect for what? She opens her notebook, shows him pages of careful planning. The showcase is public. Open microphone before the featured performers. Anyone can sign up. Anyone can take the stage for 3 minutes, including someone with his father's poem and 37 years of overdue justice. Kalen's stomach lurches. You want me to perform Dad's championship piece? At the same event where Brandis will be hosting, judging, controlling the narrative about who deserves to be heard. Isolde nods. Sometimes the only way to expose corruption is to force it into the light, with witnesses, with cameras, with no place for the truth to hide. But what if what? They humiliate you again? They already did that. What if they silence you? They're already doing that. What if you fail? You're already failing by not trying. Her words hit like cold water, shocking him into clarity. Besides, she continues, you won't be alone. From her bag she produces a manila envelope. Been busy since our last conversation. Inside the envelope, photographs, documents, contact information, local reporters who've been investigating arts funding irregularities, community activists asking questions about equity and cultural programming. And this, she slides forward a printed email response from Sylvester Stallone's production company, confirming his appearance at the showcase as a surprise guest judge. He's coming. Isolde smiles. Turns out his new project involves discovering authentic voices in unexpected places, and someone may have mentioned that this particular showcase has an interesting history. Someone. She shrugs innocently. Janitors know how to make phone calls. The coffee shop buzzes with afternoon conversation, but Kalen feels suspended between terror and possibility. Weeks later, the night arrives. the community center transforms into something grander than usual red carpet professional lighting. Television cameras from local news stations, an audience of 200 including city council members, arts patrons, cultural critics, and one Academy Award-nominated actor sitting quietly in the third row. Kellen watches from the back as open microphone. Participants take their turns. Safe poems about spring flowers and personal growth and gratitude for community support. Each performance receives polite applause and encouraging nods from Brandis, who stands beside the stage like a proud curator. His moment approaches, name called from the sign-up list. Keelan viral whispers ripple through the audience. Recognition from the viral video months ago. Young man who got destroyed by reality. He walks forward carrying his father's notebook, his father's words, his father's courage borrowed for 3 minutes on stage under lights facing 200 faces, including the man who silenced his father, including the man who could resurrect his father's dream. Brandis leans forward into his microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, I must say, I'm surprised to see this young man return after his previous performance. Perhaps he's learned about appropriate content and technical proficiency. Laughter from some audience members, uncomfortable shifting from others. Kalen adjusts the microphone, looks out at the sea of faces, finds Isolde standing against the back wall, nodding once, finds Sylvester Stallone watching with the intensity of someone who recognizes the moment before everything changes, clears his throat, opens the notebook to his father's poem. Ladies and gentlemen, he begins, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Tonight, I'm performing a piece written by my father. Riven Hollow Glenfer, the 1987 City Poetry Championship, which he won before being disqualified for technical irregularities that didn't exist until they needed them. To gasps from the audience. Brandis moves toward the stage, face darkening. This poem, Kalen continues, is called When the System Eats Its Young, and begins, his father's words flowing through him like inherited lightning. We build monuments to progress while children sleep in cars. We celebrate innovation while innovation starves. In zip codes we pretend don't exist. The room shifts, energy changing from polite attention to electric tension. We count success in dollars that never reach the hands that built the buildings. Where we count them. Brandis signals to someone off stage, but the cameras keep rolling, and Stallone leans forward. We speak of merit while rigging every competition. We preach equality while practicing exclusive mathematics. Voices from the audience, murmurs of recognition of truth finally being spoken in a room designed for silence. The poem builds toward its conclusion, 37 years in the making. When the system eats its young, it calls them unworthy. When the system eats its young, it blames their hunger. When the system eats its young, it promises tomorrow will be different. But tomorrow arrives with the same appetite, unless someone teaches it to fast silence. Deep electric, pregnant with change, that applause starting slowly building until 200 people stand clapping for words that should have been heard decades ago, except for one man who stands red-faced, trembling with rage, realizing his carefully constructed narrative just crumbled on live television. Confrontation he's been avoiding for 37 years just became unavoidable. The applause continues thundering through the community center, like 37 years of suppressed truth. Finally breaking free, Brandis, ironful, storms toward the stage, his composure shattered like glass against concrete. This is inappropriate, he shouts over the continuing ovation. This young man is disrupting a sanctioned cultural event, but his words dissolve in the ocean of sustained applause. Television cameras capture everything: his red face, his desperate attempts to regain control, his panic as orders slip through his fingers. The third row, Sylvester Stallone, rises slowly, his presence commanding immediate attention the way mountains command skylines. The applause gradually fades, replaced by electric anticipation. Mr. Ironful Stallone's voice carries the authority of someone who spent decades fighting for underdog. I'd like to understand something. He steps into the aisle, moves toward the stage. With the deliberate pace of inevitable justice, this young man mentioned irregularities in a 1987 competition, technical irregularities that led to his father's disqualification. As someone who was present at that competition, I'm curious about these technicalities. The room holds its breath. Brandis freezes like prey, suddenly realizing the hunter was watching all along. You were there. Brandis stammers. Stallone nods. I was researching a project about fighters who use words instead of fists. Riven. Hologlin was extraordinary. His performance that night was flawless. So, when the judges announced his disqualification for violating rules that seemed to appear out of thin air, I asked questions. Stallone reaches into his jacket, removes a small digital recorder. Questions like what specific rule was violated. Questions like who decided to implement new restrictions mid-competition. Questions like whether artistic content was being censored for political reasons. He presses play. Brandis's voice, from 1987, younger but unmistakable, fills the silent room. We can't have someone like that representing our cultural programs. His poetry is too aggressive, too confrontational. It sends the wrong message about our community values. The recording continues. Find something, anything, a formatting issue, a registration problem, I don't care what. Just make sure he doesn't win. Another voice asking about fairness, about artistic merit, about the judges' responsibility. Brandis responding, artistic merit is subjective. Community standards are not. We decide what represents the city's culture. And it won't be some angry young man with a chip on his shoulder. Stallone stops the recording. The silence stretches like a held breath before explosion. The television cameras capture Brandis staring at the recorder, his face cycling through denial to recognition to desperate calculation. From the back of the room, Isolde Nightshade steps forward, her janitor's uniform replaced tonight by dignity and 38 years of careful observation. Mr. Stallone, she calls out, her voice carrying to every corner. You might also be interested in these. She opens her worn leather bag, removes the manila folder, holds it high for everyone to see. Original documentation from the 1987 championship rules, as they existed before convenient amendments. Registration forms signed and dated, proving Riven Hologlin met every requirement, and correspondence between Mr. Ironful and city officials discussing the need to control problematic artistic content. She walks forward, her footsteps echoing in the silence, each step a drumbeat of approaching justice. For 37 years I've cleaned up after this man's decisions, have emptied trash cans filled with dreams he crushed. We've mopped floors where young artists bled hop. I've watched him build his career on the silence of voices he systematically eliminated. She reaches the stage, hands the folder to Stallone. But I've also kept records because somewhere in my janitor's heart, I knew this day would come when truth would demand its audience. Stallone opens the folder, scans the documents, his expression growing darker with each page. The television reporter steps forward, microphone extended. Mr. Ironful, do you have a response to these allegations? Brandis looks around the room, desperate, searching for escape. Finding only 200 witnesses, television cameras, and the weight of recorded confession. This is, he stammers, this is. What? Stallone interrupts, his voice carrying decades of accumulated disgust. A misunderstanding. An administrative error? A coincidence? He steps closer to Brandis. Eve spent my career telling stories about people who refuse to quit when the system tries to break them. People like Riven Hologlin, people like his son. People who understand that sometimes the only way to win is to keep fighting long after everyone expects you to surrender. Folder changes hands again, from Stallone to the television reporter, who begins photographing documents with practiced efficiency. Brandis makes one final attempt at damage control. This is all taken out of context. Decisions made in different times under different circumstances. Stallone shakes his head. Only context that matters is whether you used your position to silence authentic artistic voices, whether you prioritized political comfort over artistic truth, whether you stole opportunities from people who couldn't fight back. The answer to all three questions is clearly yes. He turns to address the entire room. Ladies and gentlemen, You've just witnessed something extraordinary, not just a young man honoring his father's legacy, but a community discovering what happens when truth refuses to. Stay buried from the audience, a voice calls out, "What happens now?" Stallone smiles, the expression carrying both satisfaction and promise now. Justice catches up with 37 years of running. The lights seem brighter suddenly, as if truth generates its own illumination, and in that brightness, Kalen sees his father's dream finally coming home. 3 weeks pass like slow after holding breath for 37 years. Story spreads beyond local news, beyond social media virality, into something deeper. National arts publications pick up the investigation. Reporters uncover similar patterns in other cities, other competitions, other silenced voices. Ironful resigns quietly, citing personal reasons and desire to pursue new opportunities. City Council announces reforms, transparent judging processes, community oversight committees, open records policies. Words that sound like progress. Time will prove their weight, but for Kalen the aftermath feels strangely hollow. Victory tastes different than expected, not sweet, more like medicine, necessary but bitter. Going down, he finds himself walking past the community center on Thursday afternoons when the building sleeps between scheduled activities. The stage where he performed his father's words looks smaller now, ordinary, just wood and lights waiting for purpose. Isolde meets him there one gray February afternoon, carrying coffee and the comfortable silence of shared accomplishment. "How does it feel?" she asks. "To win?" He considers the question, watching dust motes dance in shafts of afternoon light, like waking up from a dream you thought was real life. She nods, understanding the displacement that follows long-fought battles. "Your father would be proud, would he?" Kalen asks. Or would he wonder why it took so long? Isolde sets down her coffee cup on the edge of the stage head. Understand that some fights take generations to finish, that justice doesn't follow convenient timelines, that sometimes the victory belongs to the children who inherit unfinished wars. From her bag, she removes a large manila envelope, thicker than usual. The city wants to make amends. Inside the envelope, official letterhead, formal language, and surprising substance: a posthumous recognition for Riven Hologlen. Acknowledgement of the 1987 championship he rightfully won. Declaration that his disqualification was based on procedural errors and personal bias, not the full truth, but truth enough for official records. There's more. Isolde continues. The community center wants to establish the Riven Hologlen Poetry Fellowship Annual Award for emerging voices who challenge conventional thinking. Full scholarship to summer intensive programs, mentorship opportunities, publication support. They want you to be the first recipient. Kellen stares at the documents, his father's name in official type. Recognition delayed but not denied. But the envelope contains something else: plans for a memorial, a permanent installation in the community center lobby, not a statue or traditional plaque, something more fitting. Isolde unfolds architectural drawings, showing a glass display case built into the wall beside the main entrance. Inside the case, his father's notebook open to the championship poem, preserved under museum lighting, a small brass plate with simple inscription, Riven Hologlen 1965 to 2019 poet. Father, voice of truth, when words are your only weapon, make sure they're sharp. Below that, a rotating display featuring work from fellowship recipients, year after year, ensuring the legacy continues growing. Callan traces the architectural lines with his finger, imagining visitors stopping to read his father's words decades from now. It's beautiful, he whispers. But there's one more thing, Isolde says, her voice carrying anticipation. Sylvester Stallone wants to meet with you. Envelope contains business card and handwritten note. Kalen, your father's story deserves a bigger stage. Call me Sly. Below that, phone number and address in Philadelphia. He's developing a documentary series about artists who fought corruption in cultural institutions. Your father's story could be the first episode, but more than that, he wants to fund traveling exhibitions, taking the fellowship program to other cities, finding other silenced voices, giving them platforms, making Sure, what happened to Riven doesn't happen to anyone else. Keelan looks around the empty community center, seeing it differently now, not as the place where dreams die, but as the place where they resurrect, where his father's voice finally found its rightful audience, where truth proved stronger than systems designed to bury it. The afternoon light shifts through windows, casting new shadows across familiar spaces. Everything looks the same but feels transformed, like waking up in the same room, but discovering you're in a different house, on a different street, in a different city where justice actually lives. Isolde stands, gathers her papers, leaves the envelope for him to process. She turns back. Your father used to say that poetry wasn't about beautiful words, it was about building bridges between what is and what should be. You built that bridge, Kalino. Others can cross it. The community center grows quiet again, except for the sound of heating systems and settling wood and possibility expanding like breath held too long, finally released. Outside, winter begins its slow retreat, making room for whatever grows next. 6 months later, the community center hums with different energy. Tuesday nights still happen, but the chairs fill with new faces, voices that carry stories untold for too long. The glass display case catches morning light. Riven Hologlan's notebook open to page 17, where his championship poem waits for readers. Children press noses against the glass, sounding out words too big for their vocabularies, but not too big for their hearts. Adults pause between meetings, reading lines that make them think about their own unspoken truths. Bronze plaque bears witness marks, fingerprints from visitors who touch his name like blessing. Kalin watches from across the lobby as an elderly woman explains to her granddaughter why the words matter, because someone was brave enough to say them even when the world wasn't ready to listen. First Riven Hologlan Poetry Fellowship recipients represent voices the old system would have silenced. Narissa Deepglen writes about immigration and the mathematics of belonging. Thulin Blackthorn crafts verses about environmental justice in neighborhoods where trees cost more than children. Saphira Moondusk explores identity beyond binary definitions, beyond comfortable categories. Each poet receives what Kellen's father was denied, not just funding or opportunities, but belief that their stories deserve stages. Documentary cameras return periodically, capturing progress, measuring change, and transformed. Live Sylvester Stallone appears occasionally, not for publicity, but for connection. Sitting quietly in back rows, listening to voices fight their way toward light, he understands what Kalin learned in those months after his father's vindication. Victory isn't a destination, it's a direction, a commitment to keep moving toward justice, even when the path disappears in darkness. Traveling exhibition visits 12 cities the first year. In Detroit, a spoken word artist discovers her grandfather was blacklisted for writing protest songs in the 1960s. In Phoenix, a community theater director investigates why certain plays never get produced despite popular demand. In Seattle, a high school poetry club challenges their district's censorship policies. Each city uncovers its own Brandis Ironfuls, its own silenced voices, its own buried truths, but also its own Isolde Nightshades. People who kept records, who remembered stories, who waited for the right moment to speak. Change spreads like ripples from stones thrown in still water, not dramatic, not immediate, but persistent, inexorable. Real Kalin receives letters from young poets across the country, sharing their own family mysteries, their own discovered legacies. A girl in Alabama finds her aunt's hidden manuscripts. A boy in Oregon learns his uncle was expelled from college for controversial artwork. Each story adds weight to the understanding that artistic censorship wasn't aberration, but system, wasn't accident, but design, was impasse, but ongoing pattern requiring constant vigilance. One Tuesday evening in late autumn, Kalin takes the stage at open mic night, not to perform his father's words, but his own. A new poem about inheritance that goes beyond genetics, about how courage can skip generations, waiting for circumstances that allow it to breathe, about how justice isn't event, but process requiring participation from every generation. The audience listens with attention his father never received in life but receives now through proxy through continuation through the persistent voice of dreams that refuse to stay buried after the applause fades. Kalen returns to his seat in the back where his father used to sit, where he learned to listen. Before speaking to observe, before acting to understand. That some fights take lifetimes to finish. What would you do if someone crushed your dreams in front of everyone you trusted? The question echoes differently now, carries different weight. Would you fight back? Would you disappear? Or would you understand? That sometimes the most powerful response is patience, combined with preparation, combined with faith that truth eventually finds its voice. Outside the community center, the city moves with rhythms slightly altered by ripples. Most people never notice, but Kalen notices in conversations that happen in different keys, in questions that get asked where silence used to live in, young voices that speak without permission because they learned. Permission isn't required for truth. The glass display case reflects. Evening light back into the lobby where visitors continue discovering that some stories don't end when people think they do. They continue in children who inherit unfinished dreams, in communities that choose remembering over forgetting, in systems that bend toward justice when enough people refuse to let them bend away. Riven Hologlan's notebook remains open to page 17 where words wait, patient as stone, sharp as promises, true as morning. Light breaking through 37 years of artificial darkness. When the system eats its young, it calls them unworthy. When the system eats its young, it blames their hunger. When the system eats its young, it promises tomorrow will be different. But tomorrow arrives with the same appetite unless someone teaches it to fast. The words glow under museum lighting under the steady gaze of visitors who carry them into streets where they multiply like seeds finding soil in unexpected places, and somewhere in those streets another young voice practices courage in the privacy of notebooks waiting for their own Tuesday night, their own stage, their own moment. When silence becomes impossible, the cycle continues as it should, as it must, as long as truth needs voices brave enough to speak it. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe.